We see our relationship with Jesus as a contract, meaning it becomes void once we break our end. And for all of us who approach our relationship with God as a contract in so many ways, the older son is right. He's right. Come on, he spends all the money. And you throw a party for him? In other words, what he really means here, he does not deserve it, but I do. Good morning once again. My name is Davi, and I'm glad to share, to talk about this chapter with you, this story with you today. We will skip Q&A today because of the time, so usually we do Q&A after the sermon every Sunday, but if you have a question or a comment, make sure to write it down, and then we can talk about it later. I remember when I was 6 or 7 years old, I remember an episode with my uncle. I had an uncle who used to visit my parents and my grandparents. We used to live in the same house, so it was the same house. And when my uncle used to visit us, he enjoyed drinking, and sporadically he would bring some of his friends from the town to our house to drink with them. Um, so he was doing that on a Saturday, and I remember it was a Saturday, and he asked me to go to his car, to grab a bottle of whiskey. I was 6 or 7. I said that already. So I went there. I was trying to be helpful, but then when I got the bottle, it slipped out of my hand, and it broke. And I was not that far because they saw it. They saw what happened. And then as soon as I realized that, I ran away. I ran away, and I went to the neighborhood, and I stayed there for hours until they were gone. So then I came back home. My mom said it was an angel who broke the bottle because they didn't want them, drinking there. I tried telling this to a boy running away. That it was an angel. No, it was not. It was me. And I was ashamed. I thought I wouldn't be welcome there after that because, this was an expensive bottle of whiskey, and my one uncle was probably really mad at me that day. I'm telling you this because in our journey as disciples of Jesus, we commit many mistakes. We sin, we are ashamed, we devote our time and attention to things we shouldn't devote our time and attention to. In other words, we betray Jesus, we replace him, we don't want to be with him. And at certain times in our journey, we feel unfit to follow Jesus. When we realize what we are doing, we feel inadequate to follow Jesus. Thoughts come to mind. We think we are not put out for the job. We feel we are not accepted. We feel discouraged. When failure appears, we feel discouraged, and we have this temptation of running away and giving up. So what can we do about it? This is what we're going to focus on today. So we are close to the end of our calling series. We started beginning of September. We are going to different scripture passages studying Jesus calling men and women to follow him and to do certain specific things. So today we are going to focus on Peter. So I feel like I need to provide a little bit of background so then we can understand what's happening here on this chapter we read. So Jesus called Peter to follow him in the beginning, which he did, leaving behind the nets, the boats. Peter was a fisherman by trade, so he left all that behind and he followed Jesus. He was one of the 12 disciples and probably the leader there, a leader among them. And we can see Peter, he was an impulsive guy. He was quick to speak, quick to act. Peter was the first and only to ask Jesus to call him to walk upon the water. He was the first and only to try to stop Jesus from washing his feet. He was quick to cut the soldiers' ear when they came to arrest Jesus in the garden. We see this impulsiveness in his life. And when Jesus said that Jesus was going to die on the cross, and he was telling this to the disciples, and he said the disciples would abandon him, Peter said, no way, I'm not going to do that. And Jesus said, Peter, you are going to deny me 3 times. And Peter said, no, I will not. Even if I must die with you, I will not deny you. But this is Peter, impulsive, thinking he can do everything, proud. And now, close to chapter 21, perhaps maybe 2 or 3 weeks before what happened when Siobhan read here for us today, the soldiers came to arrest Jesus. And then they took Jesus to the high priest's place. And Peter is now following Jesus from a distance. And he enters the courtyard. But then the person at the door asks Peter, Peter, are you a disciple of Jesus? Peter said, no, I'm not. And then in the courtyard, Peter is warming himself in a charcoal fire. And 2 more times, people ask him, Peter, are you I think I've seen you with Jesus. And Peter says, no, I'm not. And then a 3rd time, same thing happens. And then the rooster crows, and then Peter realizes what he just did. I betrayed my Savior. I betrayed Jesus. And the Bible tells us that he leaves weeping bitterly. And then Jesus rises from the dead. This is on the 3rd day, and he appears to the disciples. This is the 3rd time Jesus appears to the disciples. But then, the first 2 times, Jesus didn't address Peter directly. Jesus addressed Thomas. He said, Thomas, here's my hand. You can touch it. So he addressed what Thomas was going through, but not Peter. So here we have now John chapter 21. In our passage for today, Peter decides to go back fishing. It's verse 3. I don't think this is here just because they were bored. And Peter decided I'm going to do something with my time. I don't think so. I think Peter, feeling unfit to follow Jesus, feeling unfit to be one of his disciples, he simply goes back to what he used to do before. He simply goes back to what was safe. He simply goes back to what he knew how to do things in. Imagine Peter being reminded every morning by the rooster of what he did. Every day. So he goes back. He decided to go back fishing, and that's what he does. And the disciples follow him. He brings the disciples with him. And then in this passage, it is interesting, verse 1 that says that this is how Jesus revealed himself. So I have 4 things here that's showing how Jesus revealed himself to Peter. So the first one is that Jesus reminds Peter of the first call, verses 4 to 8. See how similar this scene is to the first call recorded in Luke 5. 3 things. The disciples spend the night fishing, but they can't catch anything. Then Jesus shows up. Jesus tells them to try one more time. There's a little bit of different here, but in essence it's the same thing. And then they get a large amount of fish they can barely haul. Very similar. But there is one difference. In the first time, Peter, when he realizes that Jesus was something else, he says, Jesus, run away from me. Go away because I'm a sinful man. But here, it's different. When they catch a considerable amount of fish, he realizes that the man who told them to throw it up, John is the one who realizes this and tells him, it is the Lord. And then Peter, at that moment, he realizes that Jesus is still calling him. He realizes that the calling is still valid. He realized that Jesus had not given up on him. Same thing. Didn't catch fish. Now someone shows up, tells me to throw the other side, and then I have it is Jesus. The calling is still active. He realizes that Jesus gave him grace. So what happens here? So Peter jumps in the water and goes to the Lord immediately. Try to picture this. John tells us that they were almost 100 yards away from the shore. That would be terrible for me. I would need help. But Peter goes. He could have waited, right? The disciples waited. What is happening, Peter? Perhaps he's thinking, Jesus, I thought I was done. I thought I was unfit to follow anymore. But now that I see that you are calling me, there's no time to waste. I thought I was not cut out to represent you, Jesus. But now that I see that you're still calling me, I'm leaving these things behind. And I'm immediately going to you. I won't even help them with the fish. They can take care of that. I'm going to go before you. And that's what he does. And then there, verses 9 to 14, Jesus reminds them of how committed he is. It's interesting, the language here. The disciples arrive. They see a charcoal fire. Jesus had prepared breakfast for them, bread and fish. And John tells us that Jesus takes the bread and gives it to them. I think there's something else here for us. So, because this is very similar to John 6. On the shore of the same sea of Tiberias, a multitude of people were there. They were hungry. The disciples experienced Jesus multiplying fish and bread. And there it says that he took the loaves of bread and he gave it to them. And here we have Jesus doing the same thing. Meaning, reminding them of his love, of his loyalty, of how he had given his life for them. Here we have the Son of God laying down his life for imperfect people, for people who betrayed him. Here we have Jesus providing not only physical food, but providing life. So Jesus reminds them of his love, of his loyalty. I've heard this interesting analogy a few times, and I think it is appropriate. Who is more committed to the breakfast? The chicken or the pork? Or the pig? The chicken brought eggs, but the pig brought bacon. Yes, you guys make that. Yes, Jesus gave his life away. And he's reminding the disciples here of what he has done. But there was still a few things left for Jesus to do. The elephant in the room, in some ways, was a present. So 3, Jesus restores Peter. It says that when they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? Do you love me, Peter, more than these? Jesus goes straight to the point. It's difficult to know what Jesus is referring to here. On the one hand, some people say that these is referring to the disciples. Peter, do you love me more than the disciples? Because Peter told Jesus that even if they abandon you, I will not do that. So maybe this is referring to the disciples. But maybe more to the context of this passage, this is referring to fishing. Remember, Peter had decided to go back fishing. So Jesus asked him, Peter, do you love me more than fishing? I think either way, it is an invitation to assess his own heart. And Peter says, you know, Lord, you know I love you. And then Jesus asks 2 more times, and there's a lot of things happening here. We don't have time, but the third time that Jesus asks, Peter is grieved because Jesus asked the third time. Why? Why is Peter grieved now? Well, I believe it reminded Peter of what he did to the Lord in many ways. See how the passage is constructed here? Peter was around a charcoal fire when he denied Jesus. And here what Jesus prepared for them, a charcoal fire. And I thought, that's just a coincidence. There's a lot of charcoal fires in the Bible. Not really. Actually, these two places are the only places where we see charcoal fire in the New Testament. Something else. Peter denied Jesus in front of a group of people. Here we have Jesus in front of these 1,000 people. And very clear for us, Peter denied Jesus 3 times. And Jesus is asking if Peter loved him 3 times. So 3 times Jesus asked him. So all of that probably made Peter revisit the betrayal. Remember what he did. And maybe you're saying, come on, Jesus. Cut Peter from his lap. He's hurting. But no, that was necessary. Godly grief precedes healing. They need to talk about that. The grieving process is necessary. Jesus is really pressing Peter, not just because Jesus wants to be harsh, no, but for Peter's own good and healing. It's not enough to mention, yeah, Peter, remember what you did, it's okay. No. They needed to talk about it. And then we see Peter's own reactions here. In the past, Peter was like, no, I will not deny you. Yes, Peter, you will, Jesus would say. And Peter would say, no, I will not. But here, when Jesus asks, Peter, do you love me? He's grieved and he says, Lord, you know everything. You see his heart change. You know everything, Lord. You know that I love you. And then finally, verses 15 to 19, Jesus recognitions Peter. For 3 times, Jesus asks Peter if he loves him. And Peter answers, yes, you know I love you. And Jesus repeats 3 times, feed my lamb, tend my sheep. What does it mean to love Jesus for Peter? For Peter, he was caring and leading the people of God. While before Peter thinks he's unfit, and he goes back fishing and all that, now Jesus recognitions him not only to be a fisher of men, but to be a shepherd to the flock. And the story ends here with a call to follow Jesus. If there was doubt about Peter being part of the kingdom, Jesus reminded Peter of the first call, of his love for them. Jesus restored his heart and recognition Peter to shepherd the flock, something that Peter understood really well. Because when we continue reading the story in Acts, Peter was the leader of the church, of the early church in Jerusalem. And when we go to his letter, we see Peter really emphasizing the importance of elders shepherding the flock under their care until the chief shepherd, Jesus, appears. This is an amazing story. What caught my attention is how detail-oriented Jesus is, and what Jesus does to really restore Peter and recommission him. And the big idea for us today is this, because Jesus never gives up on his flock. He's the good shepherd. He never gives up on his flock. We should pursue an honest relationship with him. We should pursue an honest relationship with Jesus. In our journey as disciples, this idea of being unfit to follow Jesus, to love him, this sense of inadequacy as a representative of the kingdom of God will be present. Will be present in our lives. We will encounter this. Maybe we think, after all these years, I still worship myself more than God. I should be more mature by now, but I feel ashamed about the way I talk to my spouse. I thought by now I would be loving people more. I can't stand peer pressure. I deny Jesus before my friends. I have hurt other people. I have failed. I have messed up. And as a result, we assume. There's a temptation to assume we are not cut out for the job. So based on this story for today, what can we do about it? I have three simple things from this passage. Simple things that can be powerful things when we practice them. The very first thing we see here is when we have this phase and we go through seasons like this, we should immediately go to Jesus. We should go to Jesus. There is a approach, a distorted approach to our relationship with Jesus. We see this approach everywhere. Because in so many ways, this is how the world operates. We see our relationship with Jesus as a contract, meaning it becomes void once we break our end. We see our relationship with Jesus as a contract. Let me give you an example. The story of the prodigal son. Maybe you know this story. The younger son comes to his father and asks for his inheritance. He basically shows that he doesn't care for his father, simply his money. The father gives him. That's something that's crazy about that part. The father gives him. And he goes, this young boy goes and he spends all he has with parties and with the desires of his heart. And then once he runs out of money, he has to work, and the only job he finds is taking care of pigs, which is a humiliation for his culture, so that's what he's been doing. And then finally he decides to go back to the house of his father. And on the way back, he's rehearsing what he would speak. And then this is what he says: Father, I have sinned against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. This is the contract mentality. I've messed up, so I'm not worthy to be called your son. This is not valid. It's no relationship anymore because I messed up. The father sees the son coming from a distance, and he runs and he hugs his son. And as he's saying the things that he has practiced, the father orders the servants to bring the best robe, to put it on him, to bring the ring, to put it on his finger, to bring shoes for him. And he throws a party for the son. That was not in the contract. On the other hand, we have the older brother. He never left the house. He never spent the father's money. He never disrespected the father. And he gets home and he hears music, and after knowing what's going on, he gets mad. And he tells the father that he has always served and obeyed him, but the father has never given him animals to celebrate with his friends. But when this son comes home and who wasted all the money, he throws a party. What is this? It is the contract mentality. And for all of us who approach our relationship with God as a contract in so many ways, the older son is right. He's right. Come on, he spends all the money, and you throw a party for him? In other words, what he really means here, he does not deserve it. But I do. Because I stayed here. I did everything right. I did all my part in the contract, so you should give me what I need. But our approach with Jesus, our relationship with Jesus, is a covenant that he made with us. So we see here, as the contract mentality, one that is aware of his sins, and he thinks he does not deserve anymore, and the one who is not aware of his things and he thinks he deserves. But our relationship with God is based on his loyalty and his covenant to bring us to his family. And when we understand this, everything changes. Jesus has proven his love for us by laying down his life on the cross. He's loyal, he's committed, and he calls us to live in this new covenant. Not as a contract, meaning being afraid of being expelled after every mistake, but as a loved son, as a loved daughter of God. living to please him because he's great. And even though I know that covenant has a little bit of contract language here, we can see this difference, this contract and covenant mentality. So go to Jesus. Let's go to Jesus. Second, let's open our hearts before him. We should grieve what needs to be grieved until we find healing. We should grieve our sins. We should not move so quickly to think, oh, Jesus, forgive me. But there is a season and a time to grieve our sins, to grieve what they've done to Jesus. Do not be afraid of Jesus touching the wound as he did with Peter. Open your heart before him. When it comes to sin, and I don't mean here grieving the laws of a close one, I mean grieving sin. When it comes to sin, we see in 2 Corinthians 7 a difference between godly grief and worldly grief. We see that worldly grief leads to death, and it's usually when you only grieve what has happened to you, what has caused you, and the hurt there. But godly grief is when you realize the depth of your sin and what Jesus had to do to pay for you. Not all experiences of feeling bad will lead to repentance. People feel guilty for all kinds of reasons. And as one commentator puts, being sorrowful as God intended is feeling the deep grief that comes from knowing that our attitudes and actions have harmed our relationship with God. Godly sorrow feels bad because it is missing out on God. Open your heart. Create space to grieve your sins and failures with Jesus. Open up with trusted friends, people close to you, community groups. And finally, what can we do about it? We suggested for us to recommit our lives to him. Recommit our life to Jesus, not to try harder next time, but to learn from him how to live. Should recommit our life to Jesus, not to promise him that I'll never sin that again, but to seek the renewal of our minds. Jesus has something specific for us, for you. And for Peter, he was shepherding the flock. But for all of us, it is really living a life of discipleship, no matter the cost. We see here verse 17, 18. Jesus tells Peter that when he gets older, people will take him where he does not want to go. But still he was supposed to follow him. He was called to follow Jesus' path. One day, by God's grace, we know from tradition that Peter did lay down his life for Jesus. Tradition tells us that Peter was crucified in Rome, and minutes before the crucifixion, he asked them to turn the cross upside down because he wasn't worthy to die like his Savior. He did lay down his life for Jesus. So, for us here today, God's commission is not voided because of our mistakes, and we should really embrace what he has for us during this season of our life. Jesus has proven his love by laying down his life for us, and he invites us to lay down our lives for one another. And as we conclude this morning here, maybe you are feeling unfit to follow Jesus. You are feeling unfit to do something that you feel Jesus is calling you to do right now. And based on this passage, what I learned here is remember when he first called you. Remember when he first called you. Remember when you first felt his presence and decided to follow him. Remember his love and how he embraces us in his grace and his care. Or maybe you are here and you never decided to follow him. but you are feeling drawn to Jesus, I encourage you to really give this a step of faith. Faith will always be involved in our relationship with Jesus Christ. And He's good, and He never gives up on His flock. So let's pray. I want to pray with you this morning. Lord, we come before you here. Lord, how many times we betray you by worshiping other things. And by your grace, you help us to see this. You show us these areas. And Lord, we want to grieve our sin. We want to grieve what you have gone through. And we want to stay here before you. Because that's the best place we can be. Thank you for loving us. Thank you for laying down your life so that we could have life. Help us to follow you even when it is really hard. Help us to follow you even when we have to give up of so many things. Help us to hear you conditioning us, and give us the grace and the power to obey and to continue following you. Thank you for your love. Thank you for your loyalty, God. Thank you for being committed to us, Lord. Thank you for this covenant that you call us into, Lord. And thank you for everything that you have done. In your name we pray. Amen.